Welcome to Flyp Academy.
Welcome to Lesson 5 of Russia in early 1917. In this unit, the key questions are: what was the provisional government and how was it run? What problems did the provisional government face? What was the Petrograd Soviet? What was the relationship between the provisional government and the Soviet? These are the key terms. Read through them carefully. Provisional government, Soviet, dual power, anarchy. Task: pause the video and make your own keyword glossary. Add any key term definitions to the keyword glossary for each topic as you go along. Make sure you know what all the keywords mean. They are very important. Challenge: use the keywords in a sentence. With the final Duma split and 12 of the members rebelling against one of the Tsar's final orders to dissolve, Russia was in political chaos. Russia had also been under autocratic rule. The Tsar had been answerable to no one but themselves. Although nations across Europe had seen the transfer of power from autocratic monarch into the people's hands for the last 300 years with the English Civil War and the French Revolution, the people of Russia had not been given any sort of transition of power. Even when Nicholas II agreed to the creation of the Dumas in 1905, Nicholas still had the ultimate power to dismiss them as and when he pleased. In February 1917, Russia was therefore in political chaos. The provisional government was formed on March 1st, 1917. It was meant to be a temporary body that would govern Russia in place of the Tsar until elections could be held. Unlike the Petrograd Soviet, however, the provisional government was another unelected body meant to represent the interests of the people. Many in Russia saw it as a dictatorial body of upper-class citizens. Prince Lvov was its prime minister, for example. Elections were delayed, and the provisional government was in power until later that year. The provisional government took major decisions. Russia continued its military action in World War I, and land reforms were postponed. Both rulings greatly affected the Russian people. The provisional government consisted of a cabinet of ministers. The prime minister was Prince Lvov, a wealthy aristocratic landowner, and other leading figures. Milyukov, foreign minister and leader of the cadets. Guchkov, war minister and leader of the Octobrists. Kerensky, minister of justice and social revolutionary. The remaining ministers were chosen from the Octobrists and cadet parties. Task: summarize the provisional government, its structure and its formation. Highlight the similarities and the differences between the rule of the provisional government and that of the Tsar Nicholas II. Why may the structure of the provisional government have concerned the people of Russia? Based upon the knowledge that you already hold, what do you predict for the future of the provisional government? Explain the reasons for your prediction. The Petrograd Soviet did not set out initially to be an alternative government. It had been established in the earlier revolutions of 1905. The Soviet regarded its role as supervisory, to monitor the situation and treatment of workers. However, the provisional government often seemed unsure of its own authority, giving the Soviet greater prominence. Soviets were set up rapidly in all major Russian cities and towns after February. The Petrograd Soviet seemed to hold greater credibility, popularity and power than the provisional government amongst the people who saw the Soviet as a better representation of themselves. The provisional government was made up of the upper classes. The Soviet was also able to restrain the government. For example, one of its first steps was to pass Soviet Order No. 1. The Provisional government's orders in regards to military affairs were only binding if the Soviet had also approved them. Task: summarize the Petrograd Soviet, its structure and its formation. Highlight the similarities and the differences between the rule of the Provisional government and the Petrograd Soviet. Based upon the knowledge you already hold, what do you predict for the future of the Petrograd Soviet? Explain the reasons for your prediction. There was some initial success with what came to be known as dual power. There was a general acceptance that the collapse of autocracy should not be allowed to slip into anarchy, the absence of a central authority. The Bolsheviks were not in a position to influence matters, while the other main socialist parties, such as the Mensheviks, were reluctant to demand too much too soon. The Provisional government achieved success in some matters. These included amnesty for political prisoners, legal recognition of trade unions, an 8-hour day for industrial workers, the replacement of the Okhrana with a people's militia, granting of full civil and religious freedoms, and preparations for the election of a constituent assembly. However, the dual power arrangement did not touch on the critical issues of the war and the land question. At this point, it's important to remember that even though Russia had undergone a revolution and removed its autocratic leader, they had still remained a player within the First World War. Task: write a tweet from the perspective of the Provisional government or the Petrograd Soviet. The tweet needs to discuss your working relationship and how you are finding sharing dual power. The Provisional government experienced problems with governing Russia following the abdication of the Tsar. Task: examine the problems facing the Provisional government and identify whether these were economic, political, or military problems. Further problems were created when the Petrograd Soviet ordered Soviet Order No. 1, 14th of March 1917. The order stated, "The Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies has resolved, in all its political actions, troop units are subordinate to the Soviet. All types of arms must be kept under the control of the company and battalion committees, and in no case turned over to the officers, even at their demand. The orders of the State Duma shall be executed only in such cases as do not conflict with the orders of the Soviet Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies." The order undermined the role of the Provisional government, its authority and its leadership. Task: explain the significance of the Soviet Order No. 1. Task: look back at your previous task assessing the problems facing the Provisional government. Where would the Soviet Order No. 1 fit? Economic, political, or military? Explain your answer. Meet Alexander Kerensky. As well as Milyukov, the War Minister Alexander Guchkov resigned from the Provisional government. Guchkov wanted to suppress soldier demonstrations by force. In the reshuffled cabinet, Alexander Kerensky became the War Minister. Task: create a profile page for Kerensky on a job advertisement website. You'll need to research Alexander Kerensky, his experience and his involvement with dual power. Think about the following areas: name, date of birth, work experience, employment before 1917, experience and responsibilities following the abdication of the Tsars, skills and attributes.